Tuesday night Bible study. Last Tuesday night we started in the book of Daniel. We started with chapter 1, verse 1. I think we got through maybe 3 or 4 verses. But what we're going to do tonight, we're going to pick back up in it. And we were talking about Daniel. And we're talking about, of course, we know Daniel has been captured and taken to Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar burnt the city to the ground in Jerusalem, and he also destroyed the first temple, which is Solomon's temple. We know he carried off a bunch of the temple artifacts, and he put them in his house of his God. And we will find out how that goes for him a little later as we get into the study. But tonight, let's pick back up at verse 3, and what we're talking about, and I've done these 2 verses last Tuesday night, but I want to do them again because I want to tie them into 5 and 7. So let's read verses 3 and 4, and we'll talk about them. All right. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes. Now we looked at what we looked at last week was what Ashpenaz had to choose from. And we know the king has, and verse 4 tells us what the demands, the qualifications are. So he says in verse 4, children in whom was no blemish, well-favored, skillful in all wisdom, and cunning and knowledge, and understanding science, and such had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning of the tongue of the Chaldeans. Now, let's talk about that a minute. We talked about the system of indoctrination, and that's what this Babylonian king is going to do. And I'm sure this is not his first time. I'm sure at this time, you got to remember, King Nebuchadnezzar, he was the most powerful man in the world at this point. All right, not only on top of that, but we know God called him the statue of the head of gold. In other words, he was the most powerful kingdom up to when Christ returns and sets his millennial rule up. His kingdom was the most powerful. We know that through Scripture. We know that through history. So anyway, he started his indoctrination. So he's got 8 qualifications that he wants from these individuals. And then, of course, we know they're children because verse 4 says children. Most Bible scholars believe these were gentlemen. These were young men, anywhere in their early teens to late teens, maybe up to 20, 22-year-olds, somewhere in that neighborhood. So these were young men. He wanted them to come from a royal bloodline. He wanted them as princes. He wants youths. He wants young people. He wants them without blemish. He wants their physical appearance to have a good look. In other words, handsome individuals. He wants them in good appearance. He also wants them well educated. He wants them in skillful in knowledge. He also proficient in science. He wants them refined and polished. Why? So he knows they've got to stand before the king. Now we look at what's got to be chosen, but now let's look at the pressure put on this Ashpenaz. He knows if he doesn't choose the right individuals, that he could lose his head. He had a tough job, and he was responsible for what, in other words, who stood before the king. He wanted individuals very smart. He wanted people that, and you also got to look at this. On the other side, on the flip side, if these were princes, these were royal blood in the kingdom of the Jews in Jerusalem, in Israel. These men would be well looked upon by the rest of the captured Jews that followed in. So these men would be easy, the king would believe these would be easy to indoctrinate and change the outlook of all these Jews. Now, let's go on. Let's get back into it. Verse 5, I'm going to read verses 5, 6, and 7. And we'll break these verses down and explain them. So we know this was Ashpenaz's responsibility. We know, and we're going to find out here who all was chosen. The Bible doesn't really tell us everybody, but it gives us 4 individual names. And we're going to talk about them tonight. All right. Verses 5. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of wine, which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, and at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Let's stop there. Let's talk about this verse. Why would the king give them meat and drink from his table? Remember, this is the most powerful man in the world at this time. There's a couple of reasons. First reason, like I said, I'm sure this ain't the king's first time. All right. He would do this, and Ashpenaz would tell him, in other words, he would tell these individuals, hey, you've been chosen by the king, and we're going to give you the best we're going to feed you from the king's table. We're going to give you drink from the king's table. Why? Why would he do that? There's many reasons, but let's discuss a few of them. The first main reason is loyalty. They're trying to win their loyalty to the king. Remember, this is a type or form of indoctrination. If he fed them from the king's table, his meat and his drink, it would be the best in the land. Remember, if you were over making sure the king had the best and you sent him a rotten apple, you would lose your head. So whoever was over the king's table, he got the best. Now, would this be a big honor for these individuals to choose this? And we'll talk about that when we get there. But another reason was the king knew if he fed them his best, that these individuals for 3 years would not only become loyal to him, he would think, but they would be in great health because he had nothing but the best to eat and the best to drink. So the king appointed these 4 men a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of wine to drink. And like I said, in the ancient world, much more than the modern world, there would be a huge difference between the king's food and common people's food. Just like I said a minute ago, whoever was over the king's portion, there's an individual over it. If the king received something rotten, if the king received a bad piece of fruit, he would probably take whoever was over it and kill them, probably cut their head off. So it was a big responsibility for this, even to feed the king. Verse 6. Now among these were the children of Judah. Now, something to point out here. Children of Judah. This was the lineage that Christ come through. Remember that. He come through the line of the tribe of Judah. Okay? So we know that these individuals were royalty, and also they were in the bloodline of Christ. Now, who are they? Let's look at them. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, let's talk about these names. Names at one time meant something. I'm not saying they don't to everybody today, but back in the old world or the ancient world, especially the Jewish people, when they named a child, it was usually named to honor their God, which is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is the only God. It's Jehovah God. So the names would mean something. So let's look at this. Now, remember, the king appointed him 3 years training, and like I said before, this wouldn't be, I'm sure it's not his first time. He knew it would take 3 years to break these individuals or indoctrinate these individuals, and that's what he was hoping on. So let's look at these 4 individuals' names. Daniel, his Hebrew name means God is my judge. Now, his name was changed, and we're going to see this coming up. Belshazzar will be his new name. It's a Babylonian name, and what does it mean? It means Baal's prince. Remember, the Babylonians served many gods. They didn't serve the one true living God. They had many gods. They served sun gods, moon gods, just different types of gods. So Baal's prince, which Baal is a god in the Babylonian culture. So they changed his name to Belshazzar. Hananiah would be the next one. His Hebrew name means beloved by the Lord. Now, his new name is going to be Shadrach, and it means in Babylonian, illuminated by the sun god. Okay? Mishael, or Mishael, however you want to say it. His Hebrew name means who is as God. Who is as God. His new name, Meshach, means who is like Shak, a Babylonian goddess to Venus. So this, of course, like I said, these are named through their Babylonian gods. Azariah. Azariah's name in Hebrew means the Lord is my help. His new name will be Abednego, and it means servant of Nego. Now, the only thing I can find on this is, only thing I can assume is it's one of the Babylonian gods. It doesn't really tell me. But these men's names were changed. And remember, what's the first few things you would have to do to indoctrinate someone? You would have to gain their trust, and you would absolutely change their names to fit your culture. Now, why would they do this? Because they want to destroy the Jewish culture that's in these individuals. That's why they choose them young. It's easier for them to indoctrinate. Now, again, the purpose of the food and names and education is simple when you sit and think about it. This is an effort of indoctrination with a goal of making these Jewish men leave behind their Hebrew God and culture. Now, we're going to find out if it works or not, and it's not going to work. But anyway, I'm trying to give up any secrets, but it's not going to work. So, at this point, where we're at in Scripture is the king has come in. He's invaded, again, he's invaded the land of Israel. He's destroyed Solomon's temple. He's burnt Jerusalem to the ground. And he's burnt the temple to the ground. He's took some artifacts from the temple. Remember, that's God's stuff. Them artifacts belong to God. And we will actually see, as we get into the study, what will happen to this king for what he does to the Jewish people. And that's something that, and I'm not trying to get off context tonight, but the Jewish people are God's chosen people. Jesus, well, if you read the Old Testament, God said they're the apple of his eye. In other words, what that means is they're the pupil of God's eye, and if you touch his pupil, you're going to get his reaction. If somebody touches your pupil, you're going to get your reaction. So we know here these are God's chosen people. And through history, anything that's ever happened to the Jewish people by another group of people, God has decimated, he's stamped them out, and he's completely and utterly destroyed them. And again, that's history. It's not just Bible, but that's history. You can go back and look. You can go back and study it. So anyway, what he's done is he's going to try his best to indoctrinate these individuals. Now, let's go on. Let's read verse 7, and it'll tell us their names, okay? This is the change of their names. This is verse 7. Unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. For he gave unto Daniel the name of Belshazzar. Remember, I told you a minute ago what Belshazzar stood for. Belshazzar stands for Baal's prince. Okay, again, this was a Babylonian culture's name. All right. And to Hananiah, Shadrach. And we know Shadrach means illuminated by the sun god. And the reason I'm taking my time with these is because these individuals are really going to go through some trials, but God is going to prevail with them, and they're going to prevail through God in the end. Mishael is, of course, Meshach. We know Meshach is Shach, a Babylonian goddess to Venus, and Azariah is Abednego, which is a servant of Nego. So we know these individuals have their names changed. Now, you got to remember, you think about one thing is, and if we get nothing out of this study, this is one thing that I hope we all get from it. Okay? No matter what these individuals go through, trials, testimonies, no matter what they go through, they are 100% dedicated to God. They are 100% obligated to God, and they are 100% obedient to God. No matter what they go through. They give God the glory. Now, you got to think about this. Remember, King Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon was the most powerful kingdom ever to be until Christ returns. His millennial kingdom, of course, will be the most powerful. But up to this point, the Babylonian king here was the most powerful in the world. These were young teens. They were young. The Bible calls them children. So these men would be very easily influenced, would they not? A lot of these individuals would say, wow, King's chose me. I'm going to do everything he tells me to do. I'm going to follow him, and I'll go places. Well, actually, it will be opposite, because these individuals are not going to obey the king on a lot of these things, and these guys are going to be tried and tested. But God will prevail with them, and they will still be promoted in this kingdom. That's the great thing about our God that we serve. All right. Let's move on. Verse 8. But Daniel, did you catch that but? But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore, Daniel's pretty smart here now. Just think about this. Let me finish it. Therefore, he requested of the prince of the eunuchs, which would have been Ashpenaz, that he might not defile himself. Now, what does this mean? What's Daniel doing here? Daniel is going to stand up. Remember, they're under the law. Daniel's not allowed to eat certain meats, especially or drink wine. And I'll tell you why. Wine or certain meats, or wine or the kind of meats that he would eat, because it's blessed through false gods. He would not accept to eat this because he knew that. So what does he do? He doesn't come straight out and tell them no, but he works an angle here, which is pretty smart. Now, there was probably three main reasons here that Daniel would not eat the king's portions, okay? And this is where I'm going. First of all, the food's not kosher. It's not blessed under the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, the food, of course, would be blessed and sacrificed to idols. He knows he cannot eat or take of that. Eating the king's portion would simply imply fellowship with Babylonians, or the Babylon's cultural system. Now, that's more than likely the three main reasons why Daniel wouldn't. But, again, you got to remember, God did not forbid the Hebrews from drinking wine, but same as food, it was probably also dedicated to Babylonian gods. That's That's what I was saying a minute ago. Therefore, what does Daniel do? He requests that the king would have ordered him to eat the menu, that he would not eat the menu that the king requested. In other words, he would not eat that. So Daniel had to be very courageous here in this decision. But yet, let's look at how God will use it to bless Daniel. Now, Daniel doesn't just sit there and stomp his feet and say, nope, I'm not doing it. Daniel comes up with another plan. So rejecting the menu could have two severe consequences from the king. First of all, what would this king do to say, well, I'll get somebody else, cut this man's head off. Take him and just kill him. Or you imagine this Ashpenaz having to go back and say, king, he's refused to do this. Well, Ashpenaz could lose his head with Daniel. So there was a lot riding on this decision that he made. Okay? Now, let's do one more verse and we'll stop for tonight. Okay? Now, we're going to see Daniel's going to come up with a plan here coming up. Verse 9. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. What does that mean? Why would God do that? Because God knew Daniel was going to have to serve in this kingdom. And God knew that he would have to have favor. So God gave Daniel favor and goodwill with his authorities. So God brought Daniel into his favor. Now, God didn't abandon those who stood by him. Remember that. Remember what it said a minute ago when Daniel said he purposed in his heart? He already knew what he was going to do. God did too. God knew his decision, and God's going to bless him for it. Daniel trusted God through the process. He trusted him. So in the favor and goodwill of the chief eunuchs, God moved upon the eunuch so that they regarded Daniel with goodwill. But God also worked through the actions of Daniel to cultivate his goodwill. And we'll see that coming up in verse 10. That we'll read 10 through 14. We'll start there next Tuesday night, and we'll pick back up there. But we'll actually see what the plan that Daniel devises here. Everyone, please like and share so God's word gets out. Everyone have a blessed and wonderful Tuesday evening. And again, thank everyone for joining in. Again, please like and share so God's word gets out. Everyone have a blessed Tuesday night and good night.